Hey! All right, guys, I want to talk about two major myths that come up constantly in therapy around the idea of what therapy is and what it's here to do. The first myth is therapy is not set up necessarily to help you feel better. It's a huge myth that therapy and the function of therapy and the purpose of therapy is to help you feel better. Not true. Your purpose for going to therapy is to help you get better. What we're talking about is winning the war, not just the battle. That sometimes you're going to have to lose some battles. Sometimes it's going to be painful. Sometimes it's going to be really hard, because therapy is all about breaking down the old, breaking down old patterns of thinking and feeling and acting. And sometimes it's that idea of working out. You have to break down the muscle in order to build new muscle that's stronger, right? Running marathons, going to the gym, accomplishing any goals, gaining any new skills at first is a very uncomfortable process, guys. And that is why growth is able to happen, because we've got to break it down in order to build it back up. It is a remodel job. It is not a new build job. You are not starting over from a fetus. You are having to break down old neurology, old patterns, old relationships. Sometimes that means ripping them wide open before we can start to say, okay, this is what the problem is, and we can begin to heal it. Okay? So therapy sessions are not always going to feel good. And sometimes really good sessions and really good work means you've been shaken up and you're angry and you're frustrated and you feel pushed by your therapist sometimes, or you feel triggered that they poked at something you really didn't want to have to talk about or acknowledge about yourself. Sometimes it does bring up some guilt and some shame around actions, and that is something you can process in therapy. But the whole point is to poke at some of those places that are wounds and that are sore, so that you can remind your body, this is a place I need to do a little work around healing, right? So therapy does not always feel better. Another thing around that is the idea that you cannot feel sorry for someone and respect them at the same time. If you want your therapist to feel sorry for you and to placate you and tell you everything you want to hear and to just let you vent endlessly and complain and whine, and then you go home and you're like, oh, I feel really, really good, except nothing has been resolved. They are not helping you, and they are certainly not respecting you. Someone who respects you is someone who is willing to tell you hard truths, okay? And so sometimes it's the therapist's job to say, hey, I noticed this. I noticed this is a pattern of yours. How's that going for you? And to bring up some of those things that we observe that don't seem to be serving you. It's not that it's our job to determine what is right and wrong for you. All we can do is bring up those patterns and say, hey, I'm noticing that when you do this thing consistently, you feel like crap. So let's talk about that. Why is this happening? And there are a million, different orientations around how to address those types of things. But I just want to bring it back to, it is a red flag if your therapist is placating you and telling you what you want to hear all the time. And it is a red flag if you leave therapy always feeling like you've just been able to talk and not at all like you're being pushed to grow a little bit, okay? So therapy does not always feel good. And it's not intended to feel good all the time. Sometimes you'll get some relief. Sometimes you're going to be triggered and pushed and irritated and shaken a little. And that's okay. That's normal. Second myth is that therapy works quickly and that you will notice progress right away. And this is a huge myth for two reasons. First of all, often, in my experience with my clients, their definition of progress changes throughout the course of therapy. So for example, I get a couple in and their goal is to stop fighting and to become closer as a couple. Now, one thing that happens, and I talk to all couples about this, is the fact that sometimes in therapy, as we begin to get to know the source of the problem of this couple, for example, and we begin to really understand the root of the problem and their worldviews and their goals and their collective goals, but they're also independent goals of one another. Sometimes the realization is that they weren't really meant to be together, that they don't really want to be a couple, and that they both have maybe evolved out of the relationship and evolved away from each other. They've got different goals now in their life. Sometimes that can happen. So the goal was for them to work out their marital problems, and maybe the result that was still positive progress for both of them individually was to not stay married anymore, right? And that's kind of an extreme example. Obviously, my goal in therapy, especially with couples, is never divorce, never, never, never. And it's, really my prerogative for individuals in therapy is a lack of prerogative. It's for them to set their own prerogatives. But to be said, part of the therapeutic process is recognizing what your goals are, what they were, what they might be healthier being, and being able to really dive into the deep end of that process. Okay, so progress does not always look the way you'd expect it to look. Second of all, think about what brought you to therapy. Typically, people are coming to therapy after years and years and years of experiences that have led to them being in that state of discomfort, unhappiness, dysfunction, whatever it may be. Years, guys. And if you're seeing a therapist for 1 hour, out of all the hours of your week, 1 hour, you're thinking and feeling and experiencing something in this new way for 1 hour, you still have the rest of the week to be repeating old unhealthy patterns. And so your level of investment in therapy is going to directly impact the level of progress and how quickly you're going to experience progress in therapy. It is not like taking a pill where you're having a headache, you take a pill and you feel better within an hour. It does not work that way. You will have moments where you'll have what we call big paradigm shifts, where your whole worldview shifts, and that can be generalized to other areas of your life and it starts to get applied. But we've got to talk about neurology in the sense of you are forging new paths of thinking, literally new neurology in your brain, and that takes a little while. That's like chopping through really thick brush with thorns and flowers and all this density that has been created to keep you protected. It takes a while to chop through that and to break that down so that you have a new path, so that when you have a trigger, for example, you go this way instead of that way, which you've done for years. So you got to give it a minute. And if you feel like you're not making progress, the question is, what are my goals? Are my expectations and my goals actually something that is tangible and something that is attainable? Have I talked to my therapist about these goals and these expectations and processed those as being something that we can do together? And how much of my time, attention, and energy am I giving myself the opportunity? So how many hours in therapy and how many opportunities outside of therapy am I practicing the things that I'm working on in therapy? And that is going to be what leads to your success. So if you're going to therapy 1 hour a week and then you're going back to your old ways, you're not changing your dynamics in relationships, you're not trying out new experiences, you're not going to see progress that fast because it's applied. If the only time you do math is when you're in math class and then the rest of the time you're like, oh, I don't do math, it's going to take a long time for you to get good at math, right? So the same goes for therapy. Hope that's helpful. The two things you want to look for in a therapist and in a healthy relationship with a therapist is respect and mutual positive regard, that they actually care about you and they respect you, and then consistency. Is your therapist someone who shows up every single time? You can always count on them to show up for your sessions. You are meeting on a regular basis. They're consistent, you're consistent, and there's mutual respect. And those are the two most important things when it comes to that therapeutic relationship. Okay? Hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.